There's something about long-haul trucking that invites the unnatural. Endless roads, headlights cutting through black nothingness, and that feeling, like something's watching just beyond the tree line. Tonight, I'm bringing you 10 brand new trucker horror stories. These are real accounts from men who thought they were just hauling freight, but ended up carrying something much darker. If you're brave enough to ride with us, hit that like button. It helps this story reach more horror lovers just like you. Comment where you're watching from. Every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family is tuning in from tonight. Tell me which story chilled you the most, and don't forget to subscribe. Your subscribe gives huge support to this channel and helps us keep delivering terrifying tales from America's darkest highways. Now, let's roll. I'd been hauling long enough to know when my mind was playing tricks on me. But that night, somewhere past the Tennessee line and winding through the lower edge of the Appalachians, my gut told me this was different. The route had changed last minute. Dispatch said I'd make better time cutting through the mountain roads, even though it was past 3 a.m. and fog hung so thick I could barely see the end of my headlights. It was one of those nights where the world feels suspended. No other cars, no radio signal, just the steady hum of the diesel engine and the wet hiss of tires on old asphalt. I remember the way the trees leaned over the road like they were closing in. The smell of damp leaves and mud seeped through the vents. I'd been awake nearly 20 hours, running on gas station coffee and stale jerky. My eyes burned. That's probably why I didn't register what I saw at first. Just a pale shape in the fog. Then my brights hit him. A naked man stood dead center on the 2-lane highway. His skin was gray in the high beams, streaked with mud. He wasn't moving, just staring, one arm hanging limp, the other bent at an odd angle. I slammed the brakes, the trailer fishtailing slightly before I swerved around him. My horn blared, echoing off the trees, but he didn't flinch. My heart hammered so hard I thought I'd pass out. I caught a glimpse in the mirror, just long enough to see empty road. No man, no movement. For a while I just drove, hands tight on the wheel, telling myself it was an animal, or maybe a trick of the fog. My brain was fogged up too. The night seemed endless, every curve the same, every shadow a little too alive. By dawn I pulled into a rest stop, a small one I'd never seen before. No signs, no vending machines, just a cracked lot and 2 rusted picnic tables. The fog hadn't lifted. It hung low, swirling around the truck's tires. When I climbed out, the ground sucked at my boots, wet and soft. There was a faint smell of rot, like old leaves left to drown in rainwater. I walked the length of the trailer, checking the latches, trying to shake off what I'd seen. That's when I noticed them. Footprints. Bare ones. They started underneath the trailer, right in the mud, and led toward the cab. The prints were smeared but deep enough to show toes, each one filled with pooled water. I froze, staring at them. The shape of them looked wrong somehow. Not like a normal stride. Each step was uneven, dragging, as if the person was hurt. I checked under the trailer. Nothing but wet gravel and shadow. My stomach turned. I climbed into the cab fast, locked the doors, and just sat there, listening. The inside smelled faintly of earth. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe the prints were mine, or someone else's from before the rain. But the way they trailed right up to the driver's side door, it didn't sit right. I pulled out of that rest stop without touching my coffee, heading north until the sun burned, through the mist. Still, the smell lingered. Even after I cleaned the floor mats that night in a diner parking lot, I swore I could see faint smudges, muddy streaks across the pedals, like someone had been sitting there before me. By the time I made my delivery in Kentucky, I'd convinced myself to forget it. Just road fatigue, I told myself, but every now and then, when I caught my reflection in the dark windshield, I could have sworn I saw someone sitting in the passenger seat beside me. A few weeks later, I had to take that same route again. The dispatcher didn't care about my bad feeling. It was the fastest way through the mountains, and I needed the work. I told myself I'd stop before midnight this time, get a motel, avoid those back roads in the dark, but traffic delays put me behind schedule, and by the time I hit the Tennessee border again, the fog had already started rolling in. It was thicker than before, pressing against the windshield like smoke. The road seemed smaller, the forest closer. Every curve looked familiar, and I realized, too late, that I was near that same stretch where I'd seen the man. I tried not to look for him. Still, when the road straightened out for a few hundred feet, I couldn't help it. My eyes flicked toward the high beams, expecting that pale figure to appear again. Nothing. Just fog and asphalt. But when I passed a small green sign, I recognized the name carved into it, Dry Creek Rest Area. The same one. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe I wanted proof that I'd imagined it, or maybe some part of me wanted to face it. The lot was empty, the same 2 picnic tables half sunk into mud. When I stepped down, the smell hit me again. Earth, wet rot, like something buried shallow. The ground was still soft from rain, but there were no footprints this time. Just puddles and the quiet hum of the idling truck. Then I noticed something else. The faint shape of a tire track behind my trailer. Fresh, like another vehicle had been there recently. But I hadn't passed anyone for miles. I followed it toward the tree line, my flashlight cutting through the fog. A few yards in, I found an old station wagon half sunk in the earth, covered in vines. The windshield was smashed, a license plate from decades ago. And on the driver's side, a dark smear ran down the glass, something that looked like dried mud streaked with fingerprints. When I looked closer, I realized it wasn't mud. It was dried blood. Inside, the seats were torn, and on the passenger side floor, a single boot sat upright, filled with rainwater. I backed away fast. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the cold air thick in my throat. I don't know why, but I glanced down at the ground, and there they were again. Bare footprints leading away from the car. They went in a slow, dragging line straight back toward the highway. That was enough for me. I ran back to the cab, locked the doors, and pulled out without checking my mirrors. But as I merged back onto the road, I caught something in the corner of my eye. In the passenger window, smeared faintly into the fogged glass, was the outline of a hand. A single, muddy print, pressed from the inside. I drove until daylight again, straight through without stopping. I didn't talk to anyone about it, didn't tell dispatch, didn't even stop for gas until I was nearly on fumes. That was 3 years ago. Now, sometimes when I'm running that same mountain stretch, I'll catch a faint smell through the vents, wet dirt, rain, and rot, and I'll find streaks on the floor mats no matter how often I clean them. The last time it happened, I tried to tell myself it was just grime from my boots, but when I wiped it away, I noticed something faint carved into the plastic near the pedal. A single word. Stop. I haven't driven that route since. But sometimes when I wake up in the sleeper at night, I can feel the truck shift slightly under its own weight, like someone's walking around beneath it. And when I check the mirrors, the fog always seems to be there, even on clear nights. I was somewhere east of Nashville when the rain began to fall harder than the wipers could keep up with. The road cut through a stretch of dark, low-lying woods, the kind that seemed to soak up headlights instead of reflecting them. I'd been on the road for hours, trying to make it home to West Virginia before nightfall, but the fog rolling off the hills slowed me to a crawl. When I first saw him, I almost didn't stop. He was standing by a mile marker just before Route 41 curved into the mountains, wearing a denim jacket soaked through, one hand shoved in his pocket, the other holding a crumpled grocery bag. The kind of man who looked too worn out to be a threat. I rolled down the window an inch. "You all right?" He leaned in, water dripping from the bill of his cap. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just need a ride north, toward Kentucky. My brother's funeral's tomorrow. Bus broke down in Murfreesboro." There was something so steady about the way he said it, no begging, no hesitation, that I unlocked the door before I could second guess it. He climbed in, dripping onto the rubber mats. "Appreciate it," he muttered. "Name's Eli." I told him mine, and for a while, we just listened to the rain drumming the roof. He smelled faintly of tobacco and damp earth, like someone who'd spent his whole life outdoors. I remember thinking he looked older than he probably was, face lined deep, eyes tired. Once we hit the Appalachian foothills, he started talking. Said his brother Caleb had worked at a sawmill outside Bowling Green. "Dam blade snapped one morning," he said quietly, staring out the window. "Split him right through." I didn't know what to say, so I said I was sorry. He nodded once. "Ain't your fault, just can't believe he's gone. Last time we talked, he was going to come down and help fix up Mama's old place." We talked on and off after that, about small towns, bad weather, the kind of nothing talk that fills long drives. The further north we went, the thinner the fog became, but the silence between us got heavier. I noticed he kept rubbing his thumb over something in his pocket, like a coin or a ring. When I asked if he had family waiting for him, he said, "Just the preacher, I guess. Caleb wasn't married. Don't reckon anyone else will show." I dropped him off just after midnight near a gravel road that cut toward a small valley. There was a faded wooden sign that said, "Miller Hollow Baptist." "You sure this is it?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, thank you kindly. You drive safe." He got out, pulled the grocery bag close to his chest, and walked off into the mist. I watched until he vanished behind the trees. Then I turned the car around and started back toward the highway, but something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way the woods had gone quiet as soon as he stepped out, or how the fog seemed to close in thicker behind him. 2 miles up, I passed a small roadside memorial, a wooden cross stuck into the mud, with a few wilted flowers and a laminated photo. I almost didn't look, but the headlights caught the name written in marker. Eli Miller, 1984-2024. Gone, but not forgotten. I pulled over, heart pounding. The date of death was yesterday. At first, I thought maybe it was another Eli Miller. It wasn't an uncommon name in these parts. But the photo, God, it was him. The same denim jacket, same weary eyes. I sat there for a long time, the rain ticking against the windshield, staring at that photo while the woods pressed in from every side. When I finally drove off, I told myself it had to be a mistake, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still sitting in the passenger seat beside me. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled into a cheap roadside motel somewhere near Somerset, but I never even turned off the car. I just sat there, engine idling, listening to the rain ease into a dull hiss. I replayed every moment, the way he'd said his brother's name, the roughness in his voice, how real it all had felt. If he was dead, then who the hell had been sitting beside me for 3 hours? By dawn, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe someone made a memorial early, or maybe Eli was lying about who he was. It was weird, sure, but not impossible. I needed to see that church again. The fog hadn't lifted when I turned back onto Route 41. The woods were soaked through, branches hanging low, every hollow filled with the smell of wet pine and rot. I found the gravel road easily. There were fresh tire ruts where I'd stopped last night. The road wound down through a narrow valley, the trees closing in like ribs. After half a mile, I reached the church, or what was left of it. Miller Hollow Baptist wasn't a church anymore, just a sagging white building with a caved-in roof and boarded windows. The front doors were chained shut. I sat there, staring, feeling my stomach twist. No lights, no cars, no sign of a service. Just an old wooden sign, barely hanging, the paint flaking off. I got out and walked up the steps. The air smelled like mildew and wet paper. On the porch, there was a row of weather-warped funeral pamphlets, half melted from the rain. I picked one up. It was for Caleb Miller. Date of death, August 17th. Survived by brother Eli Miller. Funeral service, August 20th, 2024, Miller Hollow Baptist Church. I froze. Today was August 20th, except no one was here. The church was dead quiet. I walked around back. The ground was soft, sinking under my boots. There was a small cemetery, maybe a dozen graves, most of them unmarked, and one fresh mound of dirt with a wooden cross sticking out. The name, carved into it, crudely, with a pocket knife maybe, was Eli Miller. I don't remember kneeling, but I found myself there in the mud, staring at it, my throat locked tight. A plastic grocery bag lay near the base of the cross. Inside were a few things. A worn Bible, a photo of two brothers standing in front of an old pickup, and a crushed pack of cigarettes. The bag was still damp, like it had just been carried through the rain. I left it there and backed away. The forest was utterly silent. No birds, no wind, just the faint creak of the trees shifting. I didn't see anyone, but I swear. As I got into the car, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. The passenger seat was soaked, the fabric dark, like rainwater had been dripping there for hours. I drove without stopping, all the way to Charleston. I didn't even look back. It's been 3 weeks since then. I've tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, that maybe I met some other Eli Miller, and the memorial was for someone else. That's the story I tell people when they ask why I don't drive at night anymore. But some nights, when I park in my driveway, I still smell that faint trace of wet tobacco and pine. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in from the mountains, my passenger seat creaks, just a little, like someone's shifting their weight beside me. I never check anymore, because deep down, I already know who it is. It was close to midnight when I pulled off I-70, somewhere between the fog-drowned valleys of Whetstone Hollow and the edge of the Blue Ridge. My rig had been running hot for the last 50 miles, and the rain was coming down in a steady, whispering sheet. I spotted the diner by accident, its flickering neon sign bleeding faint red light through the mist. Harlan's Stop, it said, though half the letters were burned out. I hadn't planned on stopping, but after 8 hours behind the wheel and an empty stomach, the place looked like salvation. The parking lot was cracked and glistening with oil puddles. My headlights swept across an old Ford parked crooked near the entrance, its hood speckled with rust and dead leaves. The building itself leaned slightly, the siding swollen from years of moisture. Even before I killed the engine, I could see silhouettes through the window, 4 or 5 people inside, motionless, as if frozen mid-conversation. When I stepped inside, the bell above the door gave a hollow little jingle. The smell hit me first, old grease, damp floorboards, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. Every head turned at once. There couldn't have been more than 6 people in the place. An older man in a cap at the counter, a couple sitting by the window, a thin man in a booth reading a newspaper, and the waitress. Their faces were lined and tired, pale under the fluorescent light. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. "Coffee?" the waitress asked. Her voice shook just enough to notice. "Yeah, black." She nodded without a smile and turned toward the pot. As she poured, I caught sight of her hands, trembling, the pot rattling softly against the mug. I tried to make small talk, but no one else spoke. The man in the cap kept staring into his cup. The couple by the window looked like they were holding their breath. Even the radio behind the counter was off. I sat at the end of the counter, tapping my fingers against the cracked vinyl stool. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. She set the mug in front of me. The coffee was dark, steaming faintly. Then she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Leave before he comes in." I blinked at her, confused. "What?" Her eyes darted toward the door, then back at me. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice smaller now. "Not tonight." Before I could ask what she meant, the man at the counter coughed sharply, the kind of warning sound people make when they want someone to stop talking. She straightened up, turned away, and busied herself with wiping down a spotless section of the counter. Something about the air shifted. The sound of rain outside had thickened, a low roar against the metal roof. I took a sip of coffee and set it down. It tasted bitter, burnt, and a little off, like it had been sitting on the warmer too long. The door creaked then, as if something pressed against it from the outside. Nobody moved. The couple by the window froze. The man with the newspaper lowered it just enough for his eyes to show. I felt a chill crawl up the back of my neck. Then, without another word, I stood, laid a few bills on the counter, and turned toward the door. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. The waitress's face was pale as wax, her lips tight, eyes glistening with something like pity or fear. When I stepped out into the rain, the sound swallowed me whole. I climbed into my truck, turned the ignition, and glanced back through the window one last time. All of them were still staring at me. I didn't wait to find out why. The wipers beat slow, rhythmic arcs across the windshield as I pulled onto the slick, empty road. My headlights barely reached 10 feet through the fog, and the diner's red glow faded behind me until it was gone. For a while, I drove in silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The waitress's voice still echoed in my head. "Leave before he comes in." Maybe it was a local thing. Small-town folk didn't trust outsiders, especially truckers passing through at night. Still, the fear in her eyes hadn't been ordinary. It had been the kind that came from knowing something. A few miles later, the road curved along a ridge. My rearview mirror caught a flicker of movement. Headlights, maybe a mile back, bouncing faintly in the fog. I told myself it was nothing, another traveler. But every time I checked, the light stayed at the same distance, not closer, not farther. Around mile marker 212, the lights disappeared altogether. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. The fog thickened until the trees on either side looked like black bones jutting out of the earth. The rain eased into a drizzle, and for the first time in an hour, I noticed something new. A faint smear on my windshield, like grease. I flicked the wipers, but it only smeared more. When I reached the next gas stop, a single pump under a rusted tin roof, I climbed out to clean it off. The air smelled of wet pine and diesel. Under the lights, I could see it clearer now. The smear wasn't grease, it was blood. A long handprint dragged down the glass on the passenger side. My stomach twisted. I looked around, nothing but fog and the hum of the pump. The woods were silent. I wiped it clean with my sleeve, trying not to think too hard about how fresh it looked. Then I caught something in the side mirror. A man standing at the tree line. Too far to see clearly, but close enough to tell he was watching me. He didn't move, didn't step forward or back, just stood there, half hidden by the mist. His outline was heavy-set, his shoulders broad, and in his right hand, something glinted under the floodlight. A cleaver. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled back into the cab, locked the doors, and peeled out before the nozzle even clicked. The tires screeched on the wet pavement as I gunned it back toward the highway. I checked the mirrors over and over. For the next 20 miles, no headlights followed. No figure stepped from the fog. By the time I reached a rest stop outside Morgantown, the rain had stopped completely. The dawn light was gray and weak. I parked the rig, killed the engine, and just sat there shaking. I told myself I must have imagined it. The handprint, the man, the cleaver. Maybe I was just tired. The mind plays tricks when it's alone too long. But when I got out to stretch, something caught my eye. Down the side of my truck, faint streaks ran through the dust, smears that looked like fingers dragging along metal. They trailed from the passenger door to the back of the trailer, and just above the door handle, carved deep into the paint, were 2 words scratched in uneven letters. Too late. I've never driven through that stretch again. Sometimes, though, especially when the weather turns and the fog creeps low over the road, I still see him. Not in person, but in memory. Standing in that diner window, watching me leave. Still holding the cleaver. And I can't shake the feeling that maybe I was never supposed to make it out of Whetstone Hollow at all. I'd been driving through the lower stretch of the Appalachian Range all day, taking a load of lumber down to South Carolina. It was early spring, but up there, the air still bit cold enough to sting your lungs. Fog moved in sheets across the road, and the trees along Black Hollow Road leaned in close like they wanted to listen to your engine as you passed. By the time the truck started acting up, I was already 30 miles from the nearest town. Harlan Ridge, I think it was called. The dashboard lights flickered, and the air pressure gauge danced between safe and dead. I pulled off at what used to be a way station, a crumbling, moss-covered building sitting on a small hill beside the road. The roof had caved in at one end, and the metal scale platform was covered in wet leaves and rust. I figured I'd fix what I could, sleep a few hours, then call for a tow in the morning. I didn't have cell service anyway, not out there. The rain started not long after I parked. It was the kind of rain that doesn't pour, just seeps, thin and steady, turning everything slick. I climbed into the sleeper with a flashlight and a thermos of coffee that had gone cold. The hum of the rain on the roof mixed with the ticking of my cooling engine, and for a while, that was the only sound. The station itself sat dark behind me. I could just barely make out its outline through the fog. A slanting roof, a door hanging open. Once or twice, I thought I saw movement in the windows, but it was probably just my headlights catching the glass through the mist. Inside my cab, everything felt smaller than usual. The air was damp, my clothes stuck to my skin, and there was a faint smell of something sour, like old rainwater sitting in carpet. I tried not to think about how alone I was. I must have dozed off sometime around midnight. I remember waking up because of a noise, a sharp, hollow knock. 3 times. Slow. On the passenger door. Knock, knock, knock. At first, I thought it was the rain playing tricks, but the rhythm was too even, too deliberate. I froze, waiting for it again. Nothing followed, just silence. The fog outside was so thick it swallowed the moonlight. I couldn't see a damn thing out the windshield, just gray. I didn't hear footsteps, no car, no voice. I sat there for a long time, holding my breath, one hand on the door handle. I almost called out, but something about the quiet made me stop. Whoever, or whatever, was out there didn't want to talk. After maybe an hour, I convinced myself it was just my nerves. Maybe the truck had popped as it cooled, or the rain hit the door funny. I tried to sleep again, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined a face on the other side of that fogged window, waiting for me to look. When dawn finally broke, it came slow and pale, like the light didn't want to be there either. I stepped out to check the engine and froze halfway down the steps. There, streaked across the passenger window, were 3 long smears, dark, rust-colored, dried into the glass. Fingerprints, bloody, dragged down like someone had pressed their hand there and slid it away. My stomach dropped. I didn't touch it, just stood there staring. That's when I realized something else. The ground beneath the window was clean. No footprints, no mud, nothing disturbed. Just empty gravel and the rain still dripping from the trees. I told myself I'd handle it later. Just clean it off, move on. But as I turned to the front of the truck, I noticed the building again. The way station door, which had been hanging open the night before, was now closed. And there, nailed to the wooden frame beside it, was a single strip of torn paper, fluttering wet in the wind. I walked closer, squinting through the mist. There was something written on it in pencil, faint and smudged by rain. It said, "Don't open the door at night." That was the moment the quiet turned into something else. Something that felt like a warning that had come too late. I didn't leave right away. Maybe that was my mistake. But the truck still wouldn't start, and part of me wanted to understand what had happened. Or maybe I just couldn't believe it had. By mid-morning, the fog had lifted enough to see the valley below. Everything looked washed out and still, except for that building, the way station. It stood there like it was waiting for someone to come inside. I kept glancing back at the bloody fingerprints. They'd dried into the glass overnight. Dark brown now. Old blood, not fresh. There was no phone signal. I climbed the hill toward the building, flashlight in hand. The closer I got, the more I noticed the smell. A mix of mildew, rust, and something faintly metallic like wet pennies. The door groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the place was gutted. The walls were peeling, the floor covered in dirt and animal droppings. A wooden desk sat overturned, and on the wall above it hung an old shift calendar. The last date circled was from 1989. There were papers scattered across the floor, inspection logs, handwritten notes, cigarette burns. One sheet caught my eye. It looked like a report written by a waymaster named R. Cardenas. The bottom half was stained, but I could read enough. Night activity persists. Same knocking on the bay doors. Blood found again on the window. I warned him not to open it. I read it twice, trying to make sense of it. The same knocking, the same blood. I started to feel that same quiet dread from the night before. The kind that doesn't make noise. It just crawls up your spine and stays there. There was a small side room off the main area, door slightly ajar. I pushed it open and immediately felt the air change. Colder, heavier. Inside was a cot, an old blanket, and a coffee tin filled with cigarette butts. Someone had been living there once. Maybe hiding. On the back wall, scrawled in what looked like grease pencil, were words half faded by time. He comes to, the ones who stop. That was enough for me. I stumbled back outside, heart pounding. The fog was rolling in again, thicker this time, swallowing the road. My truck stood down below like a shadow. The cab, dark, door still streaked with those bloody prints. As I made my way back down, I saw something new. Beneath the window, in the gravel, where earlier there'd been nothing, there were now faint marks. Not footprints exactly, but drag lines. as if someone had crawled away from the truck. I didn't check where they led. I climbed inside, locked the doors, and sat there until afternoon, praying for a single bar of signal. When it finally came through, I called for a tow and didn't look up until I heard the driver's horn. He didn't say much when he arrived, just kept his eyes on the window with the dried stains. Before he climbed back into his own cab, he said quietly, "You're lucky it was raining last night. He don't move much when it rains." I wanted to ask who he meant, but he'd already turned away. That was 5 years ago. I still drive that route sometimes, though I don't stop anymore. The way station is gone now, burned down a year after. Locals said some kids tried camping there and found bones in the crawl space. I don't know if that's true, but every time I pass that bend in the road, my chest tightens. Because I still see it in my sleep sometimes, the fog outside my cab, the sound of those 3 slow knocks, and the way the silence after felt almost human, like whoever it was had been waiting for me to open the door. I've been driving long enough to know when something's wrong with a rig. You can feel it in the hum of the tires, or in how the steering wheel vibrates under your palms. That night, though, the problem wasn't with the truck. It was with the temperature gauge. It was early March, somewhere between Raynell and Summersville, deep in the West Virginia mountains. The roads there twist like veins, with fog that hangs low and silver, swallowing your high beams whole. I was hauling a refrigerated load, boxed frozen goods, bound for a grocery chain down in Roanoke. Everything had been routine until I hit Route 60. That's when the temperature inside the trailer began to spike. Normally, it should have stayed steady around 28 degrees, but the gauge kept bouncing. 32, 36, then back down again. I figured maybe it was a loose sensor or the unit icing over. I pulled over on a turnout that overlooked a dark stretch of hollow. There were no other lights, just trees and fog, the sound of rain starting to tap on the hood. When I stepped out, the cold hit me like a wet rag. The air smelled like rot and wet pine needles. The refrigeration unit on the trailer was growling louder than usual, a deep, uneven rumble. I climbed up the side and checked the digital panel. It was flashing AR temp in red. I tried to open the rear latch to take a look inside, but it was stiff with frost. The metal burned my palm through my gloves. After a few tries, it gave way with a crack. Inside, my breath fogged up the air. The fluorescent light flickered once, then steadied. Everything looked normal. Rows of white boxes stacked neatly, a faint mist curling along the floor. Still, something made my stomach twist. There was a smell, not rot exactly, but something sour and metallic, like old blood frozen into metal. I crouched, ran my hand along the floor, half expecting to find a leak or a busted coolant line. My fingers came away damp. Then, as I stood up to close the doors, I saw it. Near the far wall of the trailer, faintly pressed into the frost, were handprints. They weren't from outside. They were inside the locked trailer. 5 distinct impressions, like someone had pressed their palms flat against the wall from within, then dragged their fingers downward as the frost built around them. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen myself. The light buzzed overhead, the cold pressing into my spine. I tried to laugh it off, maybe condensation from when they'd loaded the boxes, or some weird quirk of the cooling process. Still, I took out my phone and snapped a picture just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. When I checked the image, the screen showed nothing but a white blur of frost. The handprints were gone. I shut the doors, locked them tight, and climbed back into the cab. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. I told myself it was nothing, just ice patterns. A trick of condensation. But as I drove back onto the road, the gauge dropped again, then spiked. And this time, the refrigeration unit gave a long, low groan, like something shifting inside the trailer. By the time I reached Gauley Bridge, it was close to midnight. The fog had thickened, turning the road into a narrow tunnel of gray. I kept one eye on the temperature gauge. It was still bouncing, erratic, impossible to trust. Every so often, I thought I heard something behind me. Not metal or machinery, something softer, like fabric shifting or ice cracking under slow pressure. At a small rest stop near Ansted, I pulled over again. The place was deserted. Just one old vending machine glowing under a broken light, rain pooling around the tires. I sat there for a while, engine idling, trying to convince myself to just keep going. Then I heard it. 3 dull thuds from inside the trailer. Even over the hum of the truck, it was clear, solid, heavy. I cut the engine. Silence fell hard. For a full minute, I didn't move. Then I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down. The beam cut through the fog in a shaky line. Every sound was sharper now. The distant rush of the river, the squeak of my boots in the mud, the hum of insects somewhere deep in the dark. When I reached the trailer, I pressed my ear against the metal. Nothing. Not even the cooling unit running. Just silence so deep it almost rang in my ears. I unlatched the doors. Cold poured out like smoke. Inside, the air looked thicker, foggy with frost. My flashlight beam trembled across the boxes. A few of them were tilted now, as if something had shifted during the drive. I stepped up, boots creaking on the frozen floor. Halfway down, I saw them again, handprints. Dozens, this time, pressed into both walls. Some small, some large. Overlapping, layered. Each one clear as if someone had pressed their palms flat. Held them there until the frost captured every ridge and line. My breath hitched. My throat felt dry even in that freezing air. I moved the light closer and saw something else. On one of the boxes near the back, there were faint scratches in the cardboard. Not claw marks, words. It looked like someone had tried to write something, but most of it was smeared. Only a few letters stood out through the ice. K-E-P-I-T. Then the rest was gone, the frost reclaiming it. That's when I heard a soft sound, like breathing. Slow, deliberate. Coming from the far end, behind the last row of boxes. I froze. The sound went quiet. My flashlight trembled as I aimed it down the narrow gap. Nothing moved, but the frost along the metal wall melted slightly, as if touched by warm air. I backed away slowly, every nerve in my body screaming not to run. When I stepped down from the trailer, I slammed the doors shut and locked them. I didn't check the temperature gauge again, I just drove. All the way to Roanoke, I didn't stop. When I dropped off the trailer that morning, I didn't mention a word to the dock workers. I handed over the paperwork and left before they could open it. But that night, when I checked my phone again, that photo I'd taken of the handprints, it had changed. It wasn't blank anymore. The image was darker now, and behind the frost, faintly visible, were outlines of faces, blurred, pressed against the inside of the trailer wall. I deleted it immediately. Didn't help. Even now, when I haul through those mountain roads and the fog rolls thick across the headlights, I catch myself glancing at the mirror, half expecting to see frost creeping along the inside of the cab windows. And sometimes, when I park overnight and the world goes still, I swear I hear it again. That low, soft sound. Breathing. From the trailer. I've been driving trucks for nearly 20 years, mostly hauling medical supplies through the Appalachian back roads. You learn to trust your instincts out here. Mountain weather turns quick, GPS drops out, and sometimes you just feel something isn't right. But that night, Deep in the lower stretch of the Blue Ridge, I ignored every instinct I had. It was late, maybe close to midnight. The fog was sitting heavy along the road, one of those thick, milk-colored layers that seem to swallow the world whole. I was following a dispatch order from a new broker out of Baton Rouge. The destination listed was a small warehouse in Larkspur Hollow, Louisiana, but when I searched the coordinates on my GPS, it just blinked red, address not found. The instructions had come by fax earlier that day, paper, not email, which already felt odd. Still, the pay was good, and the job seemed simple. Deliver medical refrigeration units. Signature required upon delivery. As I wound deeper through the mountains, the 2-lane road turned to cracked asphalt, then to gravel. My headlights caught glimpses of pine trunks, wet with rain, and the faint shimmer of water running down the ruts. No houses, no lights, just black forest and the low hum of my diesel engine. After almost an hour, I saw a small metal sign on the side of the road. The paint was almost completely worn away, but I could just make out the word Larkspur. I slowed down. Ahead, the gravel widened to a muddy turnoff leading to a large, corrugated metal building, barely visible through the fog. No lights on outside, no trucks parked nearby. I hesitated before pulling in. My CB crackled with static, but there wasn't a soul on the line. Then I saw them, 4 figures standing by the open loading bay. They didn't move, just watched as I eased the truck up the slope and cut the engine. My headlights washed over them. Men, all in work uniforms that looked a size too big, pale faces, and an odd stiffness in the way they stood, like they were holding their breath. I rolled down my window. "Evenin'. Got a delivery. Order number 1129B. No one answered. The tallest one finally lifted a clipboard and motioned for me to back up. No words, no nods, just the slow, deliberate gesture of his arm. I felt the first twinge of unease then, the kind that sits low in your stomach and doesn't go away. They unloaded everything in silence. No shouts, no forklift, just the scrape of wood on concrete and the hollow thud of crates being stacked. Every few minutes, one of them would glance at me. Not at my face exactly, but somewhere near me, like I was standing behind myself. When the last crate was off, the tall one handed me my signed paperwork. His hand was cold when it brushed mine, damp like he'd been working in water. Then they turned and disappeared into the darkness of the warehouse without another word. I sat there a moment, engine idling, trying to shake it off. Maybe they were just night shift types, tired or shy. But as I pulled back onto the road, I couldn't stop replaying the way they'd moved, slow, synchronized, like they'd practiced. The fog grew thicker on the drive back, and by the time I hit the main highway, it felt like the whole night had pressed itself against the windshield. I parked at a rest stop near Baton Rouge and went over my logs, wanting to close everything out before bed. That's when I noticed it. The delivery sheet, the one they'd signed, didn't list an address. Just a black smear across the location field, like someone had dragged their thumb through wet ink. The signature itself was nothing but a looping scrawl. No company name, no phone number. I sat there, staring at it, under the harsh light of my cab's dome lamp. I tried to tell myself it was a printing error, a clerical thing. But deep down, I knew better. That warehouse, whatever it was, wasn't on any map I could find. And now, it wasn't on paper either. When I looked out the window again, the fog had returned, rolling low across the parking lot like it had followed me all the way from Larkspur Hollow. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those men, expressionless, gray, turning away before I could meet their eyes. By morning, I convinced myself to go back. It wasn't curiosity, it was guilt. something in me needed to make sense of what I'd seen. I called dispatch first, asked for confirmation of the order. The woman on the line paused longer than normal. "Larkspur Hollow?" she said finally. "We don't have a client by that name, hun. You sure you got the right paperwork?" I sent her a photo. She went quiet again, then "That's not one of ours." That was enough to put a cold weight in my chest, but I went anyway. The road back felt different in daylight, less haunting but somehow emptier. The fog had lifted, but the air still carried that heavy, wet smell of pine sap and rot. I followed the same turns, the same gravel trail, until I reached the clearing where the warehouse should have been. It wasn't there. No building, no bay door, no sign. Just a patch of churned mud and wild grass where tire tracks disappeared into the tree line. I got out of the cab and walked the area, my boots sinking into the soft ground. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the trees and the far-off rush of a creek. But the smell hit me first, something chemical, sharp, almost metallic, like Freon or antiseptic mixed with rot. A few yards from where the loading bay had been, I found a piece of torn packing paper half buried in the mud. Printed on it, in faded blue ink, were the words, "Larkspur Medical Storage, Unit 7. The edges were burned, as if someone had tried to destroy it. I pocketed the paper and turned back toward the truck, my hands shaking without reason. The air felt colder now, and I noticed how quiet the woods had become. Not silent, expectant, like the trees themselves were waiting for me to leave. Before I climbed into the cab, I saw something move at the edge of the clearing. A man, maybe, standing still among the pines, about 30 yards out. His clothes were the same dark uniform as the men from last night, but his skin looked dry. Not pale like before, cracked like bark. I blinked, and he was gone. No sound, no footprints, just the whisper of wind through the needles. I drove until I hit the next town, someplace called Tilden's Rest. I stopped at a diner to calm down. The waitress must have seen something in my face because she asked if I was okay. I told her, half joking, that I'd gotten lost near Larkspur Hollow. She froze mid-pour. "Larkspur," she repeated softly. "That place burned down years ago. Chemical fire, killed everyone inside. Some old storage plant. They never rebuilt it." When I pressed for more, she just shook her head and walked away. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've had the same dream every night. I'm standing in that fog, watching the warehouse rise again out of the mist, metal groaning, doors opening, and those same pale men waiting by the bay, lifting their hands in that slow, silent wave. I've changed my routes now, stay out of the Appalachians as much as I can. But sometimes late at night, I still catch a faint smell through the vent. Cold, chemical air, like the inside of a medical freezer. And every time it happens, I check my delivery log. Because once, about 2 weeks ago, there was a new job request waiting for me. No return address, no client name, just a blank field with a smear of black ink. I've driven through the Appalachians for years, mostly the stretch between Johnson City and the Kentucky line. I run shipments for a hardware distributor, so late-night drives through the fog are nothing new. Still, that night was different. The rain had been steady since dusk, and the fog hung low enough that the world seemed to stop a few feet past my headlights. I remember the smell of wet pine through the vents. The road curved endlessly, coiling around ridges like a ribbon dipped in mud. My wipers dragged across the glass with that tired squeak, the sound that gets under your skin after a while. I hadn't seen another set of headlights for an hour, just darkness, trees, and the quiet drone of rain. Then I saw it. A wrecked car, silver sedan, resting half in a ditch off the right side of the road. One headlight flickered weakly, the hood crushed, the driver's side door missing entirely. I slowed down out of instinct, staring into the dark interior as I passed. Nobody inside. Just a twisted seatbelt dangling, swaying slightly from the wind. It didn't look fresh. The rain had washed away most of the mud splatter, and moss was starting to grow along the bumper. Probably been there a while, I figured. Maybe some local kid's joyride gone wrong. I made a note to call it in when I got signal again. Service had been out since I passed the Whetstone Hollow sign. A few miles later, the road dipped into a hollow, and the fog thickened. I recognized the old general store near the bend. It had been abandoned for years, windows boarded and roof caved in. I used it as a marker to know I was halfway through. Then, maybe 20 minutes later, I saw it again. Same car, same exact car. The missing door, the crumpled hood, even that flickering headlight, all of it, right down to the way the front bumper was pushed into the mud. My stomach sank. I slowed down again, squinting through the fog to make sure my mind wasn't playing tricks, but it was unmistakable. I pulled over this time, engine idling. My hands rested on the wheel, knuckles pale. The air smelled like metal and wet leaves. Rain ticked softly on the roof. I looked around. No tire tracks ahead, no driveways, no houses. Just the same silent, endless road. I told myself maybe I had looped around somehow, missed a turn, took the same road twice, but that didn't make sense. Route 46 didn't loop. It climbed, wound, and dropped, but it never circled. I drove on, trying to shake the feeling. The road stretched long and empty. No signs, no lights. Every few minutes I checked my GPS, but it still read no signal. By the time I passed the old stone bridge, the rain had lightened. I rolled down the window slightly, breathing in the damp air. The woods smelled alive, earthy, rich, almost comforting. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the fog made two wrecks look the same. But then I rounded another bend. There it was again. Same silver sedan, same missing door. This time, my high beams caught something inside. A man, sitting in the driver's seat. He wasn't moving, just facing the road, his head tilted slightly as if listening. When my headlights hit him, he turned, slowly, and looked right at me. He smiled. Not wide, not crazy. Just a calm, knowing smile, like he'd been waiting for me to come back around. My throat went dry. I drove past without stopping this time, pressing harder on the gas. My mirrors caught his face in the beam of my taillights, still smiling, still watching. I didn't stop again that night. I just kept driving until I saw the faint orange glow of a gas station sign in the distance. When I finally parked, the clerk looked up from his counter. "Long drive?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "real long." I looked back through the glass at the road behind me. Empty, silent, drowned in fog, but I swear, somewhere out there I could still feel those eyes on me. I didn't tell the clerk what I saw. He was young, barely 20, and the kind who'd call me crazy before believing a word of it. I just filled up, got a stale coffee, and sat in my truck for a long while. The rain had eased into a fine mist, turning the world outside into shapes without edges. I opened my phone. Still no signal. Only the little spinning icon in the corner, mocking me. I looked at the map again, tracing my route. There was no loop. Route 46 was a straight cut through the mountains. I couldn't have passed the same wreck 3 times. Not unless I'd somehow driven in circles without realizing it. But how? I waited another half hour before heading back out. The gas station was the last stop before the ridge, and I still had deliveries to make by morning. Besides, I wasn't about to sit there all night letting my imagination win. The fog had thickened again by the time I left. My headlights carved 2 narrow tunnels through it. The road glistened with rain, black and slick, like oil. When I reached the hollow again, I started counting landmarks: the store, the bridge, the rusted guardrail near mile marker 88. My plan was simple. If I saw that sedan again, I'd stop and look this time. It didn't take long. Just past the bridge there it was, angled the same way, one headlight flickering weakly. But this time, no one inside. The door was still missing. The interior was soaked. I parked behind it and stepped out. The cold air hit me like a wave. Wet pine, mud, and that faint metallic smell again. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and walked toward the wreck. The closer I got, the quieter it became. The rain had stopped entirely, and all I could hear was the faint creak of cooling metal. The car was old, early 2000s Toyota maybe. The front end was bent in, but there was no sign of impact nearby. No skid marks, no broken branches, like it had just appeared there. I shone my light through the open door. The seats were torn, the dashboard cracked, and in the passenger seat there was something folded. A sheet of paper, wet but still legible. It was a printed traffic report. Date, May 14th, 2014. Incident, single vehicle fatality. Location, Route 46 near Whetstone Hollow Bridge. Driver, name withheld pending notification of next of kin. I read it twice, my chest tightening. 10 years ago. I stepped back, the beam of my flashlight trembling slightly. Then I noticed something else. A faint scrape along the driver's side frame, near the missing door. Letters etched into the metal, almost lost under rust. He's still out here. The fog rolled in thicker, swallowing the trees. I turned, scanning the road, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure through the mist, standing near the bridge, just barely visible. But when I blinked, it was gone. I got back in the truck and drove until dawn. The fog thinned as the sun broke through, and the world started to look normal again. I reached my delivery point in Kentucky and unloaded in silence. I haven't taken Route 46 since. Sometimes, when I drive through other mountain roads at night, I still think about that smile. The calm, patient one. The kind that doesn't threaten, but promises. And every now and then, when the fog gets thick and the wipers drag slow across the glass, I see a flicker of light in the trees. A single headlight pulsing faintly, waiting. I don't look anymore. I've been running long-haul freight for over 15 years now, mostly up and down the Appalachian stretch, Virginia through Tennessee, sometimes further west if dispatch needs an extra hand. I like the quiet. The road at night, the hum of tires, the rhythm of the white lines. It's the only place I've ever really felt steady. This particular run was supposed to be simple. Charlotte to Santa Fe. I'd made that drive before, but this time I decided to push further before resting, figuring I'd stop somewhere past Amarillo. By the time I crossed into New Mexico, the sky had gone heavy, low gray clouds pressing against the mountains, lightning flickering like a dull pulse behind them. I was dead tired when I saw the sign for a rest area off I-40. Just a single flickering light, a cracked asphalt loop, a row of vending machines that looked abandoned even when lit. The kind of place most drivers skip, but I didn't care. I just needed a few hours. I parked near the end of the lot where the lamplight barely reached. The air smelled like rain and rust, the wind carrying a dry, electric chill. When I stepped out, I noticed how quiet it was. Not the usual hum of traffic or crickets, just silence. Even the pine branches seemed to hang still. I climbed back into the cab, left the engine idling low and leaned back. The CB radio on my dash was off. I'd killed the power when I stopped, like always. I remember staring at it though, the empty green light, the knob turned down, the small smudge of my fingerprint on the plastic. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up. No idea what stirred me at first. The world outside was black, no moon, no sound, no headlights. But then I heard it, a faint whisper, not outside, not from the wind or someone walking by. It was coming from the CB radio. At first, I thought maybe I'd left it on by accident. I reached for the dial and froze. The switch was still off, completely off. "Ray," the voice came again, crackling under static. My name, my full name, slow, almost careful, like someone testing it. I sat there staring at the radio, feeling my pulse in my ears. Nobody should have known I was here, not my route, not my stop. The whisper came again, clearer now. "Ray, you shouldn't be out here tonight." The voice was male, low, with a faint rasp that reminded me of someone breathing through a filter. I thought maybe it was a prank, some stray frequency, another driver messing around. But it felt too personal. Then it said, "You're wearing that gray jacket again." I looked down. I was wearing it. The same one I'd thrown on before leaving the last truck stop. That was the moment something inside me changed. It wasn't fear at first, more like confusion trying to turn into logic, trying to find a reason. But there wasn't one. The whisper turned to faint laughter, then silence. I reached forward and unplugged the CB completely, pulled the power cord right out. For a while, nothing happened. Just the ticking sound of cooling metal and my own breathing. I must have dozed off sitting up, because when I blinked again, dawn had started bleeding through the fog. My windshield was covered in dew, the world outside pale and hollow. That's when I noticed something strange. A line of footprints in the thin layer of dust along the driver's side door. Not boot prints, bare feet. They stopped right beneath my window. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally got out to check, the ground was still damp from the night. The prints were real, fresh. I looked toward the trees, nothing but mist and silence stretching into the foothills. I told myself it must have been a hitchhiker or some drifter passing through. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. Nobody would have known my name. Nobody would have known my jacket, my route, or the channel I always kept my CB on. That morning, I left the rest area without looking back. But something about the silence in those hills followed me all the way west. I tried to forget about it. Told myself it was exhaustion, maybe even a dream. But after a few days on the road, I started noticing smaller things, quiet things that didn't sit right. The CB would flicker once in a while, even though it was still unplugged. A faint glow under the dial that came and went. Sometimes I'd swear I could hear a voice buried in the static of my engine. By the time I was headed back east, through the mountain passes near Asheville, the whole thing had started to feel like a slow fever. One night, rain came hard through the gorge. I pulled off onto a small service road to wait it out, a narrow stretch that wound down between fog and pines. There was an old cabin near the turn, half collapsed and buried in wet moss, the kind of place nobody had lived in for years. The storm kept beating against the cab. I sat there, engine idling, staring at the reflection of that ruined house in my side mirror. Then, through the downpour, I heard it again. "Ray, you made it back." This time, the voice wasn't through the CB. It came from behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I turned, slow as I could, but the sleeper cab was empty. Just my duffel, the worn blanket, the smell of wet upholstery. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just the wind slipping through the vent, the storm playing tricks. But then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The radio was on, the switch was still off, the power cord still disconnected, but the screen glowed faintly green. A thin line of static crawled across the speaker. "Still wearing the same jacket," the voice said. I reached forward and slammed the radio face down onto the floor. The sound cut out instantly. For a moment, only the rain filled the cab, pounding against metal, running in rivers across the glass. I could smell the dampness of the old cabin outside, the rot and mud mixed with pine. Then my headlights flickered. Something moved in the reflection of the window. Not close, but far. Just enough to catch the corner of my vision. Out there, near the cabin, a faint figure stood at the edge of the fog. I couldn't see their face, just the outline, bare feet, shoulders hunched. They didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there. I put the truck in gear and left without thinking, the tires spitting mud as I climbed back onto the main road. I drove until sunrise without stopping, without looking at a single mirror. When I finally pulled into a truck stop near Bristol, I noticed something strange. My CB was still face down on the floor, but the screen was still glowing. The channel number displayed 40. That's the emergency channel, one I never use. I left it unplugged for good after that. Haven't touched it since. Sometimes, though, late at night when I'm driving through those Appalachian valleys, fog low and the world quiet, I swear I hear static, just faint, under the hum of the engine. Sometimes it sounds like laughter. Sometimes it sounds like breathing. But once, not long ago, I heard something else. It said, clear as a whisper, right in my ear, still wearing that gray jacket. And I was. I was deep in the mountains that night, somewhere along Route 322, just east of the Allegheny line. The rain had been falling since dusk, not heavy, but steady enough to soak through everything. The kind of mountain rain that smells like iron and pine sap, that makes the fog roll low and thick, so your headlights just carve a shallow tunnel through it. I was hauling a full load of spruce down from a sawmill outside Dubois. It was close to midnight when I caught the voice. Breaker 19. Any drivers eastbound, come in, please. Need help. Mile marker 118, trucks down. It wasn't the first time I'd heard distress calls on the CB. Most were drunks or pranksters. But there was something about this one. The voice sounded strained, wet. Not static, wet, like someone speaking with blood in their throat. I keyed up. Copy that, 118. You all right, driver? What's your situation? Nothing, just a faint hum. Then a whisper, please, hurry. Then the line went dead. The rain thickened to sheets. I slowed my rig, eyes on the mile markers sliding by in the beam of my headlights. 116, 117. Then there it was, 118, leaning slightly, half covered in moss. I eased onto the shoulder and flipped on my hazards. The road curved sharply right, hugging the side of the mountain, with a drop-off into black woods below. I stepped out, the air biting cold. The smell hit me first, not fuel, not oil, earthy. Rotting bark and wet dirt mixed with something faintly metallic. My flashlight cut through the fog just far enough to show the guardrail twisted down the slope. Then I saw the reflection. A glint of metal deep below. A cab. It took me nearly 5 minutes to climb down the embankment, boots slipping in mud, branches clawing at my jacket. The truck lay on its side against a tree, a flatbed hauler like mine, rusted orange, the paint almost gone. The company logo on the door was a faded circle, barely legible, but I could make out part of it. Pine Valley Timber Co. That name hit me wrong. Pine Valley. I hadn't heard it in years. My dad used to haul for them back in the 80s before the company shut down after some accident. I couldn't remember the details, just something about a landslide near Port Matilda. I called out, "Hey, you alive down there?" Silence. I climbed closer and swung the flashlight toward the cab. The windshield was shattered, vines pushing through the cracks. The driver's side door hung open. When I leaned in, the light caught something pale. At first, I thought it was paper. Old maps, maybe. Then I saw the shape of a jaw, a row of teeth. Bones. The whole cab was full of them. A complete skeleton slumped in the seat, others piled behind it like someone had filled the space with white, brittle driftwood. The dashboard was dusted with fine gray powder. The seats had rotted down to wire. I stepped back fast, nearly slipped on the mud. It didn't make sense. The truck was decades old. The bones looked dry, sun-bleached, not fresh, not even close. But I could still smell something wet and foul inside, like rain hitting old meat. Then my flashlight flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, a shift in the pile. Maybe an animal, maybe my eyes. I backed away, heart hammering. That's when I noticed the CB antenna still mounted to the cab roof, its cable dangling loose, frayed and wet. The rain hissed against the metal. I climbed back up to the road, soaked and shaking, every instinct telling me to leave. But I couldn't. I needed to understand what I'd just seen. I popped the door of my own truck, grabbed my radio mic and keyed it up. "Breaker 19, I'm at 118. You still there, driver?" Static, then, "Too late." That same voice, same wet whisper, and then nothing. The line went dead again. The fog closed in, and I sat there for a long time, staring into it, the orange glow of my hazards pulsing on the wet asphalt, thinking about that old logo, about my dad, about how Pine Valley shut down after one of their drivers vanished in a storm, hauling spruce along this very route. That was 1989. I turned off the radio, but I didn't start the engine, not yet. Something about the night felt unfinished, like I'd just woken something that had been waiting under the mud all these years. I didn't sleep when I got back to my drop yard in Clearfield. I just sat in the cab until dawn, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. The bones, the voice, maybe I'd drifted half asleep at the wheel, mixed up stations, dreamed the whole thing. But around noon I drove back. It wasn't curiosity, not really, it was guilt. My old man used to say truckers had a duty to each other out here. If a voice calls for help, you answer, he'd told me once after pulling a wrecked driver out of a ravine. He'd been dead 5 years now, heart attack in his own rig. But that phrase stuck. I parked near the same bend, now quiet under gray daylight. The rain had stopped, leaving a cool mist clinging to the trees. Birds were silent. Even the wind felt muffled, like sound couldn't carry in that hollow. The slope looked steeper in daylight, the mud darker. But when I climbed down, the truck was gone. Not just hidden, gone. The space where I'd seen it was nothing but churned dirt and tire grooves overgrown with moss. I thought maybe I'd missed the spot, so I walked the ridge, following the guardrail for 100 yards in each direction. Nothing. No metal, no glass, no sign of a wreck. Except, at the base of a tree near where I remembered the cab, I found something. A piece of metal, half buried in the mud. I wiped it clean with my sleeve. It was the Pine Valley logo plate. The paint so faded it looked ghost pink, but still readable. When I turned it over, I saw something etched into the back. A set of numbers, 061289. And below that, barely visible through the grime, a set of initials, DK, my father's initials. I froze. My dad's full name was Daniel Kirk. He used to haul for Pine Valley. His final run, according to the dispatch papers my mom kept, was June 12, 1989. he never made it back. They found his trailer empty and assumed he'd wrecked somewhere in the woods, but the rig was never recovered. I stood there staring at that plate until the fog began to move, thickening again, curling low across the ground. And then, through it, faint but unmistakable, came the hum of a CB signal. "Breaker 19, any drivers eastbound, come in." The same voice, weak, wet. I dropped the plate and climbed up the embankment fast, slipping twice. When I got to the top, my truck's radio was on. The switch was flipped. The speaker crackled. "Please, hurry! Mile marker 118. I yanked the power cord. The voice cut off, leaving only the hiss of the wind. I sat in the cab until dusk, hands locked on the wheel, staring at the fog rolling over the road ahead. I thought about my dad, about the night he disappeared, about the empty seat beside me when I was a kid, riding shotgun, listening to his low hum over the radio. Maybe I'd found what was left of his rig. Maybe not. Maybe something else had found me. Either way, I haven't used the CB since that day. I drive with the radio unplugged, the cable coiled like a dead snake beside the dash. But sometimes, when the road gets quiet enough, when the fog moves just right through the trees, I swear I still hear it. That voice, faint and broken, buried somewhere in the static, calling for help that never came. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, and I can count on one hand the times I've felt truly uneasy on the road. That week in Montana was one of them. The route had started in North Carolina, cutting up through the Appalachian passes before flattening out into endless plains. I'd been running a refrigerated trailer full of produce, and it wasn't my first time making that run. The Appalachian stretch always felt heavier, though. Those mountains hold silence differently. It presses on you. Every turn feels like you're being watched from the tree line. The fog comes low, like it's got weight. By the time I hit the Montana line, I'd been on the road 4 days straight. My back was stiff, my radio had lost signal 2 states ago, and the only thing keeping me awake was coffee gone bitter from sitting too long on the dash. That's when I first smelled it. It was faint, just a sour hint of rot. I thought maybe I'd forgotten some old food under the seat, or maybe something had leaked from the cargo, but it didn't smell like produce. It smelled organic, heavy, like damp fur or spoiled meat. I pulled off at a rest stop outside a place called Gray Elk Pass, somewhere between pine ridges and rolling mist. The place was empty except for one old pickup truck parked at the far end, half buried in fog. There was a single light buzzing over the restroom building, and the sound of insects pressing against it. Otherwise, silence. I opened every compartment, checked the cooler, even lifted the floor mats. Nothing. The smell clung, though, faint and sour, as if it had soaked into the upholstery. I ended up sleeping in the back of the cab with the window cracked, but even then, it felt like the air itself had turned stale. When I woke up, my head was pounding. The fog had thickened overnight, swallowing the road, and the pickup was gone. Only tire marks leading out toward the main highway. For the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I bought air fresheners at a small gas station near Bozeman, wiped everything down with disinfectant, even checked the trailer again. But every now and then, when the wind shifted, the smell came back. Weak, but sharp enough to catch in my throat. It was on the 6th night when I got pulled over. Blue lights flashed behind me somewhere outside Missoula, and a state trooper walked up to the cab. Middle-aged guy, tall, polite, but there was something serious in his tone. He asked for my license, registration, then leaned slightly toward the open window. "You hauling perishables?" I nodded. "Yeah, produce out of Asheville." He sniffed once, then again, slower. You aware that someone was reported missing from the Gray Elk rest stop last week? That caught me off guard. Missing? I asked. Didn't see anybody there. He studied me for a long moment. You sleep there Monday night? Yeah, just for a few hours. He wrote something in his notebook, nodded once, then handed my papers back. You're good to go. Drive safe. And that was it. No explanation, no warning. Just the sound of his car fading into the distance. That night, the smell vanished, completely. Not faint. Gone. The air inside the cab smelled like coffee and rubber again, and I should have been relieved. But instead, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe the smell had meant something. Something I'd missed. When I stopped again that night to sleep, I locked the cab doors and sat there in the dark, listening. The road outside was silent, the mountains black silhouettes against the sky. Every now and then, I thought I heard footsteps in the gravel, or maybe just the settling of the truck's suspension. Either way, I didn't sleep. I didn't think much more about the trooper or the smell until a month later. I was back home in Virginia, parked up for a few days, trying to wash the road off me. But every time I sat in the cab, even clean and aired out, I felt uneasy, like I was sitting somewhere I shouldn't be. There was one thing that stuck with me, the spot under the passenger seat. When I'd checked everything before, I'd noticed the carpet was damp there. I'd assumed it was spilled coffee or condensation, but it never dried completely. I decided to pull the seat out and check underneath. The metal bolts squealed as I loosened them, and when I lifted the seat, a sour, cold smell hit me, like moldy earth. Underneath, there was a small gap in the insulation near the floor panel. Someone had stuffed a piece of fabric down there. When I pulled it free, I realized it was part of a flannel shirt sleeve, torn and stiff with something dark. I froze. My first thought was animal blood, maybe from a deer. But then I saw the initials stitched in the cuff, D.M. My hands started shaking. I put it in a bag and drove straight to the local sheriff's office. I told them everything, the smell, the rest stop, the trooper, the missing person. They took the bag and thanked me. That was it. No follow-up call, no questions. Weeks went by, and I heard nothing. Eventually, curiosity won. I looked up news about Gray Elk Pass, and there it was. A small article buried in a local paper. Remains found near rest area believed to belong to missing hiker. No details, no cause of death, no mention of a flannel shirt. That night, I sat in the cab again. The air was still, the windows fogged from my breath. And I thought about all the rest stops I'd slept in over the years, all the times I'd been too tired to notice the small things, a noise, a smell, a shadow by the road. I thought about that trooper, the way he'd looked at me before letting me go, like he knew something he couldn't say. Sometimes I wonder if the smell wasn't just rot. Maybe it was something my mind was trying to tell me, that something terrible had happened nearby, and somehow I'd carried a piece of it with me. I replaced the seat, scrubbed everything, again, and traded the truck in 2 months later, but the feeling didn't leave. Even now, when I'm driving through the Appalachians and the fog rolls in thick, I catch a faint trace of that same scent, just for a second. It's enough to make me roll the window down and breathe the cold mountain air, trying to convince myself it's just my imagination. But deep down, I know what it smells like, and I know it doesn't fade.